Welcome to the Thought Leaders Podcast, which grew out of some astounding conversations at the two-day Human Connections Generator event hosted by Ella, the Early Learning and Literacy Alliance of Waterloo Region.
Hello, I'm Colleen James, the founder and principal consultant at Divonify, an equity, inclusion, and social justice firm. I'm honored to introduce this episode of the Thought Leaders Podcast, What Happened to You? The format of the Human Connection event was for Dr. Jean Clinton, child psychiatrist, author, and knowledge translator, to speak one-on-one with world-renowned experts. Then the discussion was brought home. Local thought leaders from the Waterloo region reflected on how the experts' information could make a difference in our day-to-day work. Dr. Bruce Perry is a renowned trauma expert and co-author with none other than Oprah Winfrey of the best-selling book, What Happened to You? He spoke to Dr. Clinton about the need to focus on the adults that are in children's lives. They are often neglected, but supporting them in their relationships is an important step to help protect children. We'll take a moment to review just one of his core messages to help frame the conversation to come.
The human brain develops sequentially. The most primitive central areas, starting with the brainstem, develop first. All incoming sensory signals from the outside world and from the body, the inside world, are first processed in the brainstem. This lower region then passes that information up to the higher areas for sorting, integration, and interpretation. If the incoming sensory material is familiar or felt from prior experience to be safe, the brainstem does not activate a stress response. However, if the incoming information is unfamiliar or previously associated with threat, pain, or fear, a stress response is activated. This happens before the information can reach the higher thinking part of the brain, literally shutting down our ability to think and process information.
Dr. Perry emphasizes the importance of connecting with a child through a tuned, sensitive relationship so that a child feels seen, heard, and understood. How we connect to each other, our roles, and our capacity to really discuss topics and issues, and especially around how do we support each other? How do we support each other? Thinking about the way we process information, things we process, and how that influences us and how we act in our behaviors, and why the change is needed and necessary in understanding and creating better and more inclusive spaces that represent our society and our communities. Now we bring you the discussion with Dr. Clinton and our two thought leaders, Sheri Roberts, Community Resource Coordinator at the Independent Living Center of Waterloo Region, and Kimiko Shibata, a resource teacher for multi-language learners with the Waterloo Region District School Board. Sheri and Kimiko took the conversation to a whole new level as they talked about the real challenges our children face, especially in this pandemic, and what we need to be advocating for locally to make their lives better. It was a dynamic conversation, and Sheri starts us off.
My experience is sort of twofold. My professional life, I work for the Independent Living Center as a community resource coordinator, helping people with disabilities connect with resources in the community. But personally, I live with a spinal cord injury. I was injured in a car crash at the age of 18. And so a lot of the stuff that he was touching on about that relationship buffering children. And, I was a child at the time when I was injured, a young adult child. Having that friends and family support was 100% key. That was the key component to my success and to the success of other people I saw around me. The other young people who sustained a life-altering injury and went on to do incredible things. Those that did best were those that were surrounded by amazing, supportive parents, extended family, friends, things like that. So that really struck me from the conversation.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about as Bruce was speaking was really that fact that stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think that's so important for us to remember, especially if you're a parent or a caring adult in the life of a child, an educator. Those opportunities for growth are essential, and discomfort is a really necessary part of learning anything from academics to social skills to learning how to tie your shoes, right? We ideally need to find that sweet spot, though. And in education, we often refer to it as the zone of proximal development, when new learning is a challenge, but then there's also that real productive struggle, but not to the point of overwhelm. So, knowing how far we can push kids to get to that sweet spot, so not bubble wrapping them, as Dr. Clinton says, but getting them to that sweet spot where they can actually learn, where they have that productive struggle, that's so key, and that's really just so tied into relationships. Really getting to know our kids, it was very validating for me to hear Bruce talking about that how humans are wired for relationship. And as he notes, even small actions can tell children, you matter, you belong. And I know that in schools this fall, I know definitely in the WRDSB, we've been really focusing on getting to know our kids, making safe harbors for them in our classrooms. I often say we teach kids first, we teach curriculum second. And we know that kids heal from adversity and trauma through that relational scaffolding. And school is honestly a great place for so many kids to regularly access safe, caring, and consistent relationships with caring adults. And not just from teachers like myself, all caring adults in the building can form these kinds of important relationships with kids. And we can also be a safe harbor for parents and guardians, especially those who have arrived from areas of conflict as refugees, or those who might actually be healing from their own trauma related to schooling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that allowing children to experience some discomfort is really vital in having them grow up to be resilient individuals. I know that myself as a child, I was raised in a household with a mother with significant mental health issues. And, some of the trauma that I experienced growing up through that, and I hate to use the word trauma, but I guess that's the word we're using, was vital in allowing me to develop some of those resilient skills that when I sustained my spinal cord injury, I didn't just fall apart. It wasn't my first time experiencing something difficult. And also, I've seen through my work with people with disabilities, specifically children with disabilities, that those that are allowed to struggle and those that are allowed to fail, those that are allowed to literally fall down sometimes, and aren't bubble wrapped and aren't so protected that they aren't allowed to experience those things, those are the children that end up doing best. Those are the ones that I see thriving. And I see them as they grow into adolescence and adulthood and deal with some of the barriers out in our world. Because let's face it, this is not the most accessible place, outside of our homes that are maybe these beautiful, accessible environments for all children. So not necessarily just children with disabilities, but that's sort of my experience. Seeing those kids thrive because they were given the opportunity to fail and to struggle a little bit is just incredible. So I think we have to, like Kimiko said, like sort of balance between protecting our children, of course, but allowing them to experience a little bit of discomfort, because that's what's really going to allow them to thrive into adolescence and adulthood.
Absolutely. And, I love what you're saying there about that. Being able to take that and develop that resilience, right? Like as Bruce was saying, that the impact of trauma on the developing brain and body, like it's very real. We have lots of documentation to show us. Yes, there are some very, very real impacts, but it is not irreparable harm. And that's the beautiful thing, right? It's important to remember that we all have this ability to help individuals heal and move forward from their trauma and relationship with them. And that kept coming back all throughout that talk. He was weaving that all through the talk, and that really made me think, yes. But beyond just our individual relationships, I also want to think about how we need to be thinking upstream in terms of correcting the economic and racial injustice that continue to contribute to trauma in our community. Right? We need to be advocating for things like a living wage or universal basic income. We need to fund culturally and linguistically appropriate supports for our racialized families and those living below the poverty line in our community. We need to ensure that we're not relying as well only on educators to be the sole mental health lifelines for a child in crisis. We need those funded frontline community mental health supports in place and the continuity, because as he said, you're not just cogs in a wheel, right? You're actually you're developing relationship with people. And so we need that continuity of care and mental health supports. And again, it takes funding. It takes us putting our money where our mouth is. It takes us advocating and writing letters to our MPPs and MPs. All players in the community need to be working together to make this happen. And as Bruce noted, we need to especially be caring for our frontline adults now more than ever. Caring adults have this opportunity to safely guide children through this difficult time, and especially if they've been through some sort of adverse experience or perhaps have experienced trauma. But we do need that societal shift, allowing us to take good care of ourselves so that we can show up for kids. We need to stop piling on more and more expectations when we need to shift away from the whole do more with less, work with a leaner team. Stop, stop, stop. We see the work of, the KW work well through the YMCA, and they're doing some wonderful, wonderful research right now on how we need to stop that being the norm of overtaxing people. We need to prioritize what's most important. And sometimes we need to just simply let things go, because good enough is good enough. This is not the time to bring in change for the sake of change, only change that's going to make people's lives better. So I think of that as, the trickle-down wellness model. We need to take care of the grown-ups so that we can take care of the kids.
Well, Kimiko, one of the things I'm really curious about, we've had your director of education on here, and it seems to me that leadership is so crucial in this.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering, as you peer around your community, I'm wondering where you see the pockets of opportunity for change, or for leadership evolution.
Well, I was just thinking, in terms of the listening piece, I think we have a lot of leaders who traditionally have been very, I know best and I will tell you what to do. And I think we need to change a leadership model more to let me listen. I have 2 ears, I have one mouth. I need to be using that according to that ratio, right? I need to be listening to what people, like asking all stakeholders, inviting them to the table when we're making decisions, asking, what do you need right now? What's going to make you feel safe? What barriers do we need to remove in order for you to be able to fully participate, right? We need to listen, and then we need to act on what we hear.
Well, and Sheri, in terms of thinking about of young people with special rights, leadership in that area, moving away from a deficit model and a disability model. What are you hopeful for in your community, in the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of what you just said, Dr. Clinton, people are nervous about the term disability and they look at it like a negative thing. Whereas I think that it's something to be embraced. I think that, yes, it's one facet of people's lives, but I think that the word disability it's not a dirty word, it's a good word. So we can say disability, that's okay. But in terms of what we can do in our community to best support people, I think that something that we were talking about before was having the basic needs met is most important, because how is someone going to focus on living their best, fullest life out in the community when they can't find housing, they can't get into the assistive devices that they need, they can't get the physiotherapy that they need to allow them to use their abilities to their best potential. They're not being supported in the classroom potentially because they haven't had the right assessments done outside of the classroom to allow their teachers to know what kind of special adaptations they might need to, best flourish in that classroom. They maybe haven't, their parents don't understand how IEPs work, things like that. So I think that having all those basic needs met first is so important. And then that will allow people to really, give it their best and be able to use their potential to, their abilities to their full potential.
Absolutely. And I think in this pandemic, we've seen so much, the food banks have seen huge uptick in the number of people who are not just needing occasional food bank support, but are relying on a regular basis for food bank support. Our schools have seen a huge uptick in, nutrition for learning, the needs for that. As soon as the pandemic hit, we had significant need for that. I was volunteering with Food for Kids at the time, and we were having we couldn't meet the demand. There was not enough to go around for the so many children that didn't have enough food to eat. So we have to keep that in mind right now, right? With this pandemic, is that not all families are having the exact same experience of this pandemic. And, we might all be in the same storm, but we're clearly in very different boats. And I really like that Bruce actually pointed that out there. He was saying, this has been a minor inconvenience for him, but for a lot of folks, this pandemic has really just clearly exacerbated existing inequities. And many, many vulnerable people in our community are not doing okay. And we do see that in the schools. We see that every single day. Kids who are showing up and they're struggling because their parents or guardians are contending with things like unemployment, low wages, job insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity. We know that severe chronic stress can increase the risk for depression, anxiety, and other adverse outcomes. And that, again, it's the trickle down, right? That's trickling down to our kids. And we do have this really great opportunity to help safely guide children through this difficult time. And that's, it's a privilege. It's also a huge, huge responsibility. And it's extremely hard work. And so I'm glad that he really did point out that need for us to be taking care of the adults, the frontline adults, as he called them, who are in the lives of children right now.
Well, Kimiko, I'm also thinking about, his lovely model, of the triangle, and to regulate first, and then you can relate, then you can reason. But what strikes me about what you and Sheri have been talking about basic needs and addressing the adult needs, is just as much a process that we need to be thinking about for adults too. First help them regulate through having basic housing, a livable wage, all of those kinds of things. And then you don't have that shutdown of the reason. So that concept of it takes the whole community, but we need to be thinking at the intersection of so many things.
It is that trickle down effect. If parents aren't feeling safe and secure in their living experience, how are the children going to flourish? How are they going to do well? How are they going to feel safe and secure when they're seeing their parents struggle to, find housing, have food on the table, all those kind of things? So certainly in my experience as a person with a disability and working with that within that community, the number one thing is housing. There is not enough accessible housing, especially accessible, subsidized, affordable housing for people. I'm going to tell you, I weekly get calls. I need accessible housing. I need a home. And it breaks my heart because it's not like I have this, magical box of accessible places for people to live. And it's so upsetting, especially when I see children involved in that situation too. So I know that not only is it the adult, but their children also are feeling so insecure. So the system is broken and we need to fix it.
What I'm hearing you say is the system itself is traumatizing.
Yeah.
So there may not be this specific event, but the racialized nature of what we're talking about, the institutional discrepancies, is actually in and of itself traumatic, and that we need to be looking at it through the lens of empathy, and that reaching out to others through that mentality, I think.
Absolutely. And, we're very blessed. We have amazing school settlement workers that are working with us in both school boards, the Catholic and the WRDSB. And they have been absolutely fabulous at that meeting the basic needs, right? We think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we have to have those basic needs met before we can even think about, those calm brains are learning brains, and they're not going to get to that calm place if a child is showing up and they're starving and they have no place to sleep at night. And right, like it's been so wonderful having them on our team. They have been working themselves ragged. And that's another area I'd love to see more funding for more settlement workers. They have been absolutely fabulous at helping, especially our newcomers, to get settled. It has been very difficult for a number of newcomer families. They arrived just when the pandemic hit, and they've had very little sort of in-person support because they've been trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I get, I need my health card, and I need to figure out how to use a bank, and I need to figure out how to get clothing for my kids and how to access food. And it's been so huge, especially for our refugee population. And it's just amazing. The YMCA settlement workers have been absolutely fabulous, helping our families with those basic needs so that our teachers, our educators in our schools can actually focus a little bit on some other things, not just always focusing on just the basic needs. So it really does take a team, and it's been great to see how many people just asking for help. I'll put something out there on Twitter and say, hey, we've got a newcomer family, and they don't have any outdoor clothes for winter, and I need hats and mitts, and I need boots, and people are just like, yes, I have something, I can share it. My daughter just outgrew a jacket, my daughter just outgrew her boots, whatever. And it's beautiful to see the way our community comes together and supports each other. And so that's the one sort of hopeful thing that's sort of come out of this pandemic, is just seeing how much people want to help when you just reach out and you just ask. It's been really great to see.
You're listening to the Thought Leaders Podcast, featuring Dr. Jean Clinton in conversation with Sheri Roberts, a community resource coordinator at the Independent Living Center of Waterloo Region, and Kimiko Shibata, a resource teacher for multilanguage learners with the Waterloo Region District School Board. This podcast is an extension of the Human Connections Generator event, brought to you by Ella. Let's rejoin the conversation as Dr. Clinton speaks about the impacts of COVID.
What's interesting is a friend of mine, Josh Fullen from Maximum City, has done surveys across Canada of young people. And he did some pre and during COVID. And what he's discovered is that in young people, empathy has in fact gone up for a significant percentage. And citizenship, wanting to contribute to others, has actually gone up as well. So, it's this hope springs eternal you're describing, Kimiko, people coming in and being present for the other. As we talk about empathy, there is something about the human spirit that we are seeing activated here, that we need to be capturing and telling stories about, and sharing in ways that empower people to keep on contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience has been that, yes, of course, there's been many negative components to COVID, to the whole pandemic. But one thing that I have seen with our young people, with our teenagers specifically, with disabilities who typically have a lot of isolation issues, we're connecting via virtual programming on a daily basis to people sometimes who would never have that opportunity to meet with people who are living rurally. We have like an incredible amount of kids that are coming out and participating and feeling more connected than ever, and that's quite remarkable in this time of, being stuck at home. So I'm very hopeful that even post-pandemic, we can continue to offer some virtual programming, especially for our young people. Just before this, I was running my youth in transition group, and that's for young people that are transitioning out of the school system, and then they're not quite into the adult world yet. So there's that gap, and there's often a gap in service and a gap in connectivity. So we had 10 young people come out today. We just had a fun Halloween event. We were able to connect with them and talk about a number of things that are happening in their lives. So I'm really hopeful that the virtual component that came out of COVID will continue on into the future for the people that it's benefiting, for sure.
That is so great to hear. And, I'm finding that too. I was a little, I'm always worried when I think about, screen time, impacts of screen time, and how is it going to rob our kids of, this ability to have relationships? But, we've learned how to do things in a different way. My daughter's never had a real birthday party. She's only ever had virtual birthday parties. So that's what she thinks a birthday party is, right? And which is, it's kind of this cute thing. But we've got this like really great little birthday party jam going down now with like slideshows and games, and like it's turned into this really fun. So I'm now like the fun birthday party mom, which I never thought I would be. And kids are finding these really cool ways, and educators, bless their hearts, in our remote learning schools are finding some really unique ways of helping kids to develop that, because not all of it is that is just the academics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much of school is that sort of that unstructured time, that recess time, that learning how to solve problems and how to interact with your peers. And it's really hard to replicate that on a screen. It's incredibly difficult. So I've heard of educators telling me about doing like little drop-in things or clubs, or, hey, we'll have a lunch and chat, and you can just chat about whatever you want, and everyone can just unmute their mics, and it's just like unstructured, the way it would be if kids were having lunch in pre-COVID times with their, and just eating and chatting. And so it's great to see all the ways that we've adapted and the ways that we're using technology for good. And just seeing my daughter, having these wonderful conversations with her auntie who lives close to Ottawa, Ontario. So not exactly close enough that we'd be visiting, but she's actually grown closer to her aunt during this time because she can just grab FaceTime and grab, Facebook Messenger, and they can have this great relationship. So they've really bonded beautifully during this time. And I'm really excited. I think we need to share more of those stories of hope and resilience and finding new ways of doing things. And I'm so excited to hear about the kids that you're working with, the youth that you're working with, and how very connected folks who are out in more remote communities can be now. Like this is great. And I hope that carries over into the future.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I had one mom reach out to me, and might get a little teary eyed with this one, but she literally said that our programs through like being connected with her daughter saved her life. And I was just like so touched, for this young woman who, has had a disability her whole life and has the last number of years felt very isolated. And so our programs, her mom said, were a lifeline, to other people. And she doesn't know where she would be if it weren't for what we were doing. So it feels incredible. So yes, there's a lot of negative that have come out with it. And I know that my son has ADHD and is on the spectrum. So he really struggled with virtual learning. It was really, really challenging, especially when I was working full time and trying to help him stay connected and engaged as well. So it definitely, isn't 100% great for everyone.
Yes.
He's doing much better now that he's in the classroom. But for some people, definitely. So having it as an option. So I'm really hopeful that there will be some sort of potentially a hybrid model, where people can stay connected if virtual is best for you. Because it's removing so many barriers for people, especially people with disabilities, having to worry about transportation, getting to and from places, setting up attendant care if that's what they need. The accessibility of the location that they're going to, all those kind of things are things that you don't have to worry about anymore. And you can just focus on being connected and having that social interaction with people.
Yes, my friend's daughter has a hearing impairment, and she was finding that being in the classroom was completely overwhelming for her because she couldn't lip read. She could see the teacher was wearing a clear mask, but none of the students were. So she never knew what the students were saying. She was always frustrated. And then she switched over into remote learning and was like, "Oh my gosh, I love school. I love school," because she has closed captioning and she can read what the teacher is saying, and she fully is participating. And she went from like, school is kind of the worst and I hate it, to I love school and I'm learning so much. And it's just a beautiful thing to see. So absolutely, it's not for everyone. There's lots of pros and cons to both, but in certain circumstances like that was just one of those like aha moments. And then I thought, okay, how can we take that, what we're learning about why she likes the online school so much, how can we make that happen in face-to-face school, right? Like maybe we can be using, if we're putting a video up on the screen, hey, put some closed captioning on, or maybe having a Google Meetup where she's got captioning along the bottom where she can be listening while the teacher's speaking. She can actually get that feedback as well, or she can hear what her peers are saying. So lots of great ideas that are coming out of this, where we're just sort of observing what's working and why people are liking certain things more, and thinking, okay, how can we take that and transplant that back into what we're doing so that everyone, we're putting our most vulnerable first, or we're putting our most marginalized at the front of our planning. And how is that going to change the way our classrooms and the way our programs work, right?
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is that we need to stop separating out well-being from academic achievement. And we need to be thinking about, and I've been describing it with colleagues as like the double helix of education, like the DNA. You've got two strands in the DNA complex. And the DNA complex in this one is you've got academic achievement and you've got well-being, but the things that bind them, the base pairs in the DNA, the things that bind them are relationships. So that we don't have SEL programs that come in on a Wednesday afternoon and a Friday morning, but we've got social and emotional learning being caught by the culture, the pervasive culture of caring that happens in the community through leadership all the way down to the classroom teacher and the support staff, that you create that. And so you've got this double helix. And what the goal is to help everyone in the system become good at learning, but also good at life. And relationships is that binding force.
Yeah, well, I definitely feel like we want to be making sure that we're prioritizing relationships, but not because relationships are going to then equate to, a 2-point increase on our EQAO standardized test scores. I think we need to get out of that mindset, and we need to remind ourselves that the relationships in and of themselves and creating that safe harbor for our students, that quality, that consistency, that calmness, that regulation, that is a goal in and of itself. It doesn't need to be tied to a score. And the secret is when we put relationships first and when we put safety first and consistency and predictability, we do see increases in test scores, but that we need to be able to separate that out and say, it's not just for the test score. That's not it's a goal that is worth having in and of itself, having caring, safe communities for our kids to heal and to grow and to learn. That in and of itself is a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience isn't coming from the education perspective, but I have seen the incredible power of peer support among people with disabilities, and especially young people, just doing so much wonderful things through the power, whether it be through the power of sport, so adapted sport. I've seen kids just, oh my gosh, come out of their shell, and kids who were once timid and nervous and afraid to speak in group settings and things like that are just, doing these wonderful things because they've been surrounded by other people with like experiences who they can share what they're going through. And so, yeah, the power of peer support, it cannot be oversold. Like, I just think it's so wonderful to see that. So yeah, and again, it doesn't maybe go back to, like Kimiko was saying, like numbers on a score or like test scores or grades, but you can just see them just doing so much better. And then that's going to translate into more success in other parts of their lives. So I think, yeah, that relationships are just so important. I think also knowing what resources are out there in your community is so vital. So if you do come across someone, sometimes you feel helpless. You're like, I don't know how to help this person. So knowing about the different agencies that are out there that offer so many incredible programming and supports and services and ways to help people depending on what it is they're going through. And my experience also is teaching our kids that it's okay to talk to us about what's going on, maybe in the classroom or with their peers, right? That it's not like tattling, or it's not like, whatever the term is. I'm so old now. It's, I think that's really important because they're the ones that are going to see it first, right? They're going to maybe see a shift in their friend's behavior, or that someone is like shutting down or not being as social with their peers. And I think that's really important to make it okay to come to, whether it be their teachers or their guidance counselors or their parents or someone, so that they can reach out and see what's going on in that situation.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's so key, that the understanding of every behavior is a form of communication. And when we understand that, it opens up this whole new world of, wow, okay, something's going on. When you start watching for things, a child falls asleep at school, or they're exhibiting some unexpected behaviors or overwhelming behaviors in the classroom, we know that there's something going on. There's some unmet need. And I find that, teachers are getting so good, and educators in general are getting so good at getting curious instead of getting furious, finding out what's going on, asking, hey, what's going on, as opposed to coming down and causing further dysregulation. And I find we often find out that families need support through their children, because families won't tell us, I need clothes for my kids, I need shoes for my kids, I need food for my kids. They won't tell us that often. But the children themselves, through their behavior, once you start to investigate a little, that's how we find out who the candidates are going to be for food for kids. That's how we find out who the candidates are going to be for donations of clothing, or what other else needs might be going on, mental health needs, etc., in the family. So I think schools, yes, it shouldn't rely only on the shoulders of educators, absolutely not. But we also do need to recognize that schools are a hub of the community. And as such, we're the first contact for a lot of families for any kind of community support. So it makes sense for us to know who the agencies are, to know who to call, to know, our settlement workers, social workers, et cetera, to have that information at our fingertips, because we're the first line of support for so many families.
Well, what strikes me is this requires having an attitude of curiosity rather than an attitude of certainty.
When we're thinking about things like equity and diversity and inclusion and, creating spaces where there's minimal, there's no oppression or marginalization, we really have to think about the individual and what our individual needs to succeed, especially with children. And think about things like access and understanding that the access that one student needs may be a different type of access that another student needs, right? And being flexible. Follow a model called universal design for learning. And that means that you're using multiple ways to achieve outcomes, to achieve success, and modeling that not just in the classroom, but within the community and the people that we interact with every day.
You've been listening to the Thought Leaders Podcast, featuring Dr. Jean Clinton in conversation with Sheri Roberts, a community resource coordinator at the Independent Living Center of Waterloo Region, and Kimiko Shibata, resource teacher for multi-language learners with the Waterloo Region District School Board. This podcast is an extension of the Human Connections Generator event, brought to you by Ella. The host for this episode is Colleen James, the CEO and principal consultant of Divonify, a Kitchener-based equity, inclusion, and social justice consulting firm. She offers some final thoughts.
Wow, there was so much to digest in that conversation, so much to think about. I hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Jean Clinton in discussion with our local thought leaders, Sheri Roberts and Kimiko Shibata. Every day in their work and in their advocacy, there are so many people in our community doing their part to help lift everyone so that all can thrive. It's about watching out for, listening to, and knowing how to help people find resources that they need. It's the relationships we build, the human connections we nurture, that proves we're better in this together than apart. And that is the power of community. Thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed hosting. This was such an engaging conversation. I hope that they continue. In fact, I know that they will continue. Thank you.
Special thanks to the host for this episode, Colleen James from Divonify. Our gratitude to Dr. Jean Clinton for hosting our Human Connections event and helping to translate the knowledge of the experts with community leaders. Thank you as well to Kimiko Shibata and Sheri Roberts for their local wisdom and knowledgeable reflections. You can listen to more fascinating episodes of the Thought Leaders Podcast, part of Ella's Human Connections series, wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Kathy Lee Porter, Ella's Activator. Thank you for listening.